This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
I am Josh Hennig, and it is Monday, June 1st, here on 97.3 ESPN. Glad to be on board with you guys today. A lot going on in the world, as we know. You don't need me to tell you. Everything that's been going on in the world is all over our news, all over our social media feeds. But, hopefully here at 97.3 ESPN, we can kind of balance between talking about what's going on in the world today and talk about what is going on in sports, because there are things that are going on in the sports world. Coming up today at 1:25, Frank Klose will join me because we want to talk a little bit about the Roy Halladay documentary that came out on Friday night, the E60 piece. By now, most people have had a chance to sit down and watch it. A lot of interesting things in there talking about, and a lot of it was focused on Roy Halladay's time in Philadelphia. There wasn't as much discussed in there about his time before Philadelphia. It was very focused on that time. So I really want to talk with Frank about some of the things he talked about in the E60 plus. The Major League Baseball Players Association has given Major League Baseball their response to coming back. It is a 114-game proposal with a lot of layers. It's like an onion. It's got a ton of different layers and aspects to it. So Frank Klose, who wrote an article about it at 973ESPN.com, he'll be joining us coming up at 1:25 to dig more into that. Of course, text board is open for you at 609-403-0973, 609-403-0973. And we had to be fair in light of everything that's going on. My thoughts and prayers go out to all the people who are trying to do the right thing, and there are people who are not letting them. There's a lot of people who are stepping up, speaking out about what's going on in the world today. There's a lot of people who are trying to stand up for what is right and serve for justice. There are a lot of people who are trying to stand up and do what's right in terms of not looting and not, burning down buildings and burning down people's property. Right now there are people all around the country trying to do the right thing. They're trying to stand up for justice. They're trying to stand up for people's safety and security. And my thoughts and prayers go out to everyone who's trying to stand up and do the right thing today. But one of the beautiful things about we have the opportunity here at 97.3 ESPN is to talk about sports. And sports in many ways are a relief, a distraction, an escape from the real world, whatever your situation is. Because of this pandemic, there are tens of millions of people without jobs. And between that and everything that's going on over the last several days across the country in response to a man's murder by the police, I think it's only fair to ask this question, and that is, how much does fall on the sports world to be involved and be that escape when there are no sports being played right now in terms of baseball, basketball, hockey, and football? I hope that everything that's going on in the world does not accelerate things that should not be accelerated. I like the fact that the NBA and the NHL has been thoughtful and has taken their time in trying to come back the right way and not in a rushed way. And I hope that because of everything that's going on in the world, from the pandemic to what's been going on around the country, that there's no pressure put on sports to come back any faster, to be an escape, to be a relief than there should be. There still has to be a lot of things, a lot of red tape that has to be cut through, a lot of situations that need to be handled properly. And I just hope that we don't see, whether it's baseball or basketball or hockey or anyone try to, skip any steps and rush back because they want to be the first one back to give the world an escape from everything that's going on. Baseball, a lot of talk is that they want to get this done this week, that this is the week to get it done because part of the players' proposal is a date of June 30th. I mean, talk about really pushing forward the clock. Baseball's original proposal talked about July 4th. The players are talking about June 30th. I don't hate the idea, but like I said, it just feels like at some point you would like to see sports come back. We all do. We all love sports. But I'm just hoping that we don't see any corners cut because of everything that's going on. There's a lot of athletes doing a lot of good. We heard the stories of, NFL players in Tampa helping clean up after the looting. John Jones, the UFC lightweight champion, there's video of him walking around his city in Albuquerque, taking spray cans out of people's hands and telling them this is not the right thing to do. We know about athletes in different other cities, walking and with the protests and the marches and standing with people and encouraging them to not, get violent and not do certain things. There's a lot of athletes doing a lot of good right now, and we all want to see sports back. And as I'm looking at this baseball proposal, as it's laid out, 114 game season that any high risk players could sit out the season with pay. Any player who can sit out the season with no pay, but they wouldn't lose any time in terms of toward free agency. These are all interesting proposals. Players would agree to broadcast enhancements to add value, including having live microphones on players. The potential of a home run derby and all-star game after the season, a little bit similar to what the NFL does. You have to be honest. The players really thought this through. They are giving a very thoughtful idea to Major League Baseball. My question is it going to actually happen? And that's why I'm glad Frank's going to come on at 125, because I was talking about this on Saturday. You see what the NBA and the NHL are doing, and it looks like full steam ahead. It looks like we're going to have basketball and hockey this summer return, which excites me. Listen, I love sports as much as the next person. Maybe even more. Maybe I'm a little bit more obsessed with the next person. But, I see what the NBA and the NHL are trying to do. And I applaud them. And I like the fact that they are being positive and they're trying to do it the right way. The proposal the owners gave last week was frankly insulting to everybody. And now the players come back with their own proposal of more games, the options to defer up to $100 million in salaries. There's a lot of stuff in this proposal that comes across to me as an outsider looking in to the baseball. I don't play the game. I'm not an owner of a team. But as someone who watches and sees what's going on in the baseball world, I don't think we can overlook the fact that baseball's got to figure out something. The disdain between the players and the owners is no secret. It's no secret that if you want to see the Phillies play this summer, the odds are probably somewhere around 50-50, whereas your likelihood to see the Sixers and the Flyers play is, I would say, higher. And for players, they had, and I think they have, realized that they had to come up with a proposal that was not just stronger than the owner's proposal, but laid out what they are willing to concede on, the things that they're willing to give up, the things that they are willing to do. And it can't be overlooked the fact that there's always been this mistrust between the players and the owners. It's been going on for 40 years plus now. And it brings me back to what Jeff Passan of ESPN said on the Woj podcast when Adrian Wojnarowski asked him about the relationship between players and owners.
There is a very deep-seated mistrust between the players and owners. And that, in a lot of ways, Woj, goes back to the start of the union and really this whole relationship between the players and owners. it's been contentious. And even though MLB actually has the longest streak of labor peace in American team professional sports right now, there still always has been that element of, on the player side, the owners are trying to screw us again.
Right.
And on the owner side, the players don't know what's best for them or for the game.
The end of that is what really stood out to me. Yeah, there's a history here. But the distrust of the players to the owners, saying, we don't know if you're actually going to give us a fair shake. And the owners view the players of, well, we can't trust you to be doing what's in the best interest of the game and not just in your own personal best interest. That's a powerful difference. And I am encouraged by what the players proposed to baseball, because it shows me that they're not drawing a line in the sand, but they're acknowledging the environment that we're in. As we've talked about here on 97.3 ESPN, listen, this pandemic has changed everything for all of us. All of our lives are different. When we go out, we wear a mask. We're much, much less social than we have been in the past. Frankly, I don't know how it is for you, but for me, one of the things that when I'm watching these people out there protesting is some of them are wearing masks and some of them are not. Some don't even have the mask on their neck. They're just out there doing their thing. And it just makes you wonder, what's going on here? It's like some people are acting like there was never a COVID-19 pandemic, and other people are acknowledging that, there might be some danger when it comes to, going out in public. I don't know what the right answer is for that. I'm an epidemiologist, but, I will say that, the players have to understand that they're in a certain environment. And with Major League Baseball proposing 82 games, they counter with 114. And I think that there's a large part of that has to do with the fact that the players say, look, we need to get paid to play baseball. We want to play baseball games. And, maybe the players don't feel like a half of a season, which would be 81 games, 82 games, or a regular season is enough. If the players are willing to play more games, I say let them. More games means more potential advertising and TV money. Major League Baseball certainly has the facilities to get this done. The only reason why we're talking about the Phillies playing at Citizens Bank Park has a lot more to do with the regional sports networks than it does with anything else. And that's what Jeff Passan talked about previously, about one of the reasons why they're scrapping the ideas of Arizona and Florida to play the games this season is because of the regional sports network money.
The local regional sports networks that account for so much of baseball's revenue, because the national television contracts aren't quite as robust as they are, say, with the NBA or particularly with the NFL. The regional sports networks said, we want you to play games at home. And that desire of the RSNs and the $1 billion+ that they're going to give to broadcast games this season was a hugely motivating factor in baseball trying to go to this city by city plan.
So if you're trying to do what's best for the regional sports networks because they dictate a huge chunk of your money moving forward, then when you look at the players' adjustment to that, 114 games, the offer to defer money with interest, the players would agree to different things that they probably would have never agreed to before if it wasn't for the situation we're in. One of my favorite things when I was younger was I loved catcher cam. And I loved the fact that they would mic up the catcher at times so you could see and hear the catcher behind the plate. And, that was a short-lived fun thing. But when I was younger, I that was awesome. Fox, you turn the Fox Saturday Game of the Week and you flip on the TV and Mike Lieberthal's got the cameras on each side of his helmet. So you can see the pitch coming in, and you can see what the catcher's reaction was to a base hit or a home run. And then at times they would mic some of the players who are playing catcher as well, and they would edit the cuts together like you see what NFL films do now. And, obviously you can't have people cursing on national TV, but, the opportunity to bring the game into a person's living room, I think is an excellent offer by the players. And I'm very encouraged by that. I'm very encouraged that despite the distrust between the players and the owners, the players made a strong, honest step forward when it comes to giving baseball something legitimate, something real that they can put their finger on, something that they can go to the owners and say, look, we're not just giving you an idea. We're giving you a full-blown proposal. We didn't like your proposal. We're going to act like it didn't happen. Here's our proposal. And I think that if the owners can view this for what it is, which is a good faith gesture by the players saying, look, we want to come back and play. Here are the circumstances that we will come back and play under. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to be had, not just for this year, but for next year as well. 609-403-0973 is text board. As always, we take your text messages here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you each and every day, 1 to 2, the warm-up, 97.3 ESPN. Lead up to the Sports Fest with Mike Gill and Hunter Brody. Frank Klose will be joining us coming up in less than 10 minutes from now to get more into this baseball proposal. Also, did any of you get the chance to watch the Roy Halladay E60 on Friday night? I know it was rebroadcast a couple times over the weekend. You can tell me what you thought of that. We'll get into that with Frank as well coming up in about less than 10 minutes from now. 609-403-0973 is the text word right now. And I like this text from Rob in Bayville. He says, what makes me worry is that next year the league and the Major League Baseball Players Association have to negotiate a new CBA. If they can't come to an agreement on a COVID-impacted year, what chance is there to come to agreement on the new CBA, which would be far more complicated? Rob, I'm glad you asked that because that's the question I think everyone has to ask. We know that the way that the NBA and the NHL is structured financially, there's not a lot of wiggle room for major changing and negotiating. It's pretty straightforward. They're going to get what they're going to get, and that's it. When it comes to their regular season money, postseason bonuses, their checks, it's all been negotiated, and there's pretty much a structure no matter what. Baseball doesn't have a salary cap. Baseball doesn't have that kind of structure when it comes to the financial situation. And the reluctance of the owners to show the players the books, the reluctance of the owners to turn around and say, all right, here's our financials. This is exactly why we can and can't do certain things. This is the number, this is the amount of money we get exactly from revenue, merchandise, advertising, regional sports versus national sports. How much of our money is distributed from the league versus distributed from other things. There's so many layers that comes to the money that sports teams make every year. Like I said, advertising is a huge part of it. Advertising in the stadiums each year, advertising on the regional sports network television broadcasts, advertising, for example, in publications or websites. The Phillies have a website. If you go to the Phillies website, you might see an ad. Just like if you go to 97.3 ESPN.com, you might see an ad at the top or at some point on the page. That's a revenue source. I think the players have the right to know if the owners claim that they're going to have financial problems. The players have the right to ask, well, show us, explain it to us, give us details, lay it out for us. And if they're not willing, as you said, to come to that kind of agreement, what makes us think that a CBA is going to be affirmed in the near future? Robin Bayville, I hope, and I can't promise you this, but my hope is that despite everything that's going on, that the players and the owners can sit down in some way and say, look, this season is not the only impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next year is going to be impacted as well. The NBA is already planning for those scenarios, for example. If there's going to be fewer fans or no fans in the stands at some point this year through next season, how is that going to impact revenue? If you don't have fans in the stands, how does that impact advertiser revenue? How does that impact merchandise sales? How does that impact what you pay for when it comes to maintenance of a facility? You got to pay the grounds crew. You want to go out there and have the players play baseball, we got to pay the grounds crew too. There's so many layers to this. And Rob, I think you bring up a great point. There's a new CBA coming up very soon. And you heard Paston say in the cut earlier, baseball has gone the longest without a labor stoppage. Well, that doesn't mean that they're more in a better position to keep that streak up. Look at the NBA. They had the lockout almost 10 years ago. You could argue that the NBA is in a better place today between the relationship between the players and the owners than it's ever been. NHL has come a long way since their lockout almost 16 years ago. The NFL has come a long way since everything that went down back in, 2011? When we saw Jeff Saturday and Robert Kraft hug each other when the negotiations were done. Look, the other three sports have come a long way since their labor stoppages. Baseball hasn't. And it is a great question. And I'll ask it to Frank coming up next here on 97.3 ESPN. What kind of impact can everything that's going on now have on future CBA negotiations? How could it impact next year? And I would venture to say that in my personal perspective, I would say that it's going to have a serious impact because whatever's agreed to to get this season started is going to have some sort of rollover to next year and the next year's CBA discussions and the future of sports in general, because you're talking about baseball, basketball, football. These are billion-dollar industries. Well, if your revenue pie shrinks, how does that impact everything moving forward? And if baseball can't get themselves together and figure out that there's a domino effect that goes far beyond this year, and that maybe the players who sign these huge contracts like Bryce Harper and Mike Trout and others, they just might not ever get to see some of that money. Maybe that has to be conversed. And the sooner they can come to that realization that the world as we know is changing for everybody, maybe the better it is for them to handle everything moving forward. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. Phillies Insider joins us next. We'll get into more about this proposal for Major League Baseball Players Association, what it means for the baseball season, the future of the league. Also, the Roy Halladay E60 and more your text messages this hour, 609-403-0973 here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Welcome back to the warm-up. Josh Hennig hanging out with you on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text in just a bit at 609-403-0973. But right now, over at 97.3ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, check out Frank Klose's coverage of the Phillies in Major League Baseball as the Players Association has come back with their own proposal, and I would argue is probably the most legitimate proposal of anything that's been talked about by baseball or the players in weeks. So Frank Klose now joins us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Frank, how you doing today? Frank, you there?
Yes, I am. I have no audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but I wasn't getting any audio.
Okay, well, we got you now. So, Frank, I wanted to ask you, when you're talking about, what the players have put forth, does it feel like this proposal by the players is probably the most legitimate proposal that's been given by both sides thus far?
Yeah, I think they recognize that there needs to be some additional revenue streams created. And they recognize that, yes, that is going to have to come from somewhere, which is why the players agreed to a second year of expanded playoffs, meaning that next off season they can create extra revenue by having extra teams in the playoffs, and that will benefit the teams to help them get back some of the money that was lost. They were willing to defer some money. I honestly think that number will be negotiated higher than that in terms of deferrals when we get to the final version of this, whatever it is. And I think that, the fact that they're willing to do things in terms of the broadcast, to just, again, try to create more interest, to create more value to the broadcast. I think they're – and also, too, they were willing to have a home run derby and an all-star game, even if it's in the off-season. So I think that in this case the players really show that something is necessary in order to get to get some revenues in there, and that hopefully will go a long way.
Frank, when you look at, for example, the 114 games and some of the other logistics that go into baseball resuming, the fact you talked about June 30th potentially as the start date, does some of this feel ambitious, or does this actually feel like this is a legitimate possibility?
What I think is going to happen here is they set 114 games. That's the number that the players put forth. I wonder if they're doing that so that they can sort of settle somewhere closer in the middle, like 100. The Major League Baseball teams, they proposed 82. Players don't want that because their salaries are supposed to be prorated based on the number of games played. That's what they agreed to on March 26th. And so by saying 114, well, maybe they can come back and meet at 100 or something if that's what's going to make it work. So, this is a lot like other negotiations and collective bargaining agreements. Or heck, if you ever bought a car and you're negotiating the price, right? You might start push a little further than your actual number and see it kind of come back towards the middle to something that you're still okay with. But I think we all know that Major League Baseball is not just going to say, sure, okay, and then accept this proposal for what it is.
Now, one of the things I also noticed, because one of the things that all of us on 97.3 ES talked about with all the sports is logistics. Now, we know that there were previous proposals about Florida and Arizona. Now they're going to go back to the regular cities, and part of that is probably because of the regional sports networks that's been talked about. Well, they're talking about having another spring training before resuming the season. So, Frank, does that mean they're going back to Florida and Arizona anyway?
Well, the recent report said that teams like the Phillies wanted to train in Philadelphia. And I think that a lot of players want that for their own safety because they have residences that are near the ballparks, in a reasonable way. And they feel like if they're at home, they can better protect themselves in terms of their health. So, if everybody had to go to Florida, or if everybody had to go to even Arizona, which is not where teams train or play their games, there's really no home base there. And so now you're asking them to stay in hotels and, eat takeout all the time or whatever food they provide. They're going to be very much cut off from the rest of the world, and they can't feel like they have some sort of control over their own health. So letting players be at home, I think, is going to go a long way, even if it is their in-season home and not their permanent home.
Frank Klose joining us on the Worldwide Kind of Hotline on 97.3 ESPN or 97.3 ESPN.com. Phillies Insider. Check out his article right now on 97.3 ESPN.com as the players have given their own proposal back to Major League Baseball. And is there a part of you, Frank, that you mentioned the example earlier of you're negotiating over the price of a car, right? Well, that negotiation doesn't get played out in the media. Doesn't it feel like a little bit that because some of this is being played out in the media like it is, that is, for lack of a better term, exasperating the circumstances of all this?
Yeah, I think they want the sides. Each side kind of wants to show the public they're negotiating in good faith. What you don't want is the fans to start rallying against the organizations, because guess what? When the product returns, you're going to want the fans to spend their money on it. And I mean, let's face it, a lot of people are out of work. A lot of people don't have the disposable income that they had a year ago, and they're going to pick and choose their entertainment dollar wisely. So you don't want to put them off if you can help it. I think both sides want to show that they have the best interests in place. That's why some things sort of leak out ahead of time, so you can kind of gauge the public, and then hopefully they come to an agreement and fans can be on board. I think that the fact that we have both proposals kind of public at this point, that there was some pushback from the players publicly. Again, that's the other wild card in all this. You have players like Max Scherzer who are very vocal about what they think of the proposal, and of course he was not a fan. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic that hasn't really existed before for a collective bargaining agreement. The Twitter factor, but I think they mainly just kind of want to show that they're trying, and they got to get to an agreement, because what you can't have is some appearance that either side was in bad faith, and if that's what you get from all this, there's reason to reject the sport. On either side, you could say, well, the owners want too much money or the players want too much money, and that's a turnoff. So hopefully they can get this to work. And I think in a way they're kind of releasing these things so that they just can show that, yeah, they're working on it, and it gives people kind of faith that something will happen.
Now, we had a texter text in before you came on. I want to bring the question up to you as well, Frank. Rob from Bayville asked, what is going to be the impact on the conversations that are being had now to start this season on the future? Because we know that the baseball CBA, that's coming up soon. And, we know that whatever happens this year will have some sort of rollover impact on next year. So, Frank, what could potentially be the impact on whatever agreement the players and the owners do come to start the season this year, what it could happen on the future of baseball?
Well, I think the fact that both sides seem to have quickly agreed with the universal designated hitter, I tend to think that is going to be a permanent part of the game now. I think once they do this year, there's no going back. And, something we've negotiated a lot or talked about a lot over the years. And while I personally don't love the designated hitter, I can understand why it's there, and I think it's inevitable. But I think this is the time that happens. And I also think that if baseball does have take the players up on the idea of expanded playoffs for a second year, I would not be shocked if that just kind of sticks, even though it's supposed to be a short-term solution and added revenue at a time where the game needs revenue.
We know that baseball, you mentioned the expanded playoffs. We know that baseball already talked about expanding the playoffs already. Are they talking about expanding it beyond what it would be? Or are we talking about basically an extension of what they want to do? Or what do you think what they mean by an expanded playoff?
Right. So they were kind of talking about adding 2 more wild cards to the mix in each league. And I think that's what they're kind of talking about here, that they would have 4 wild cards and 3 division winners. And the wild cards would sort of play off to get to the next round, and there would be buys. And I think that's the model that they're going to be looking for. So, if you look at the standings, that would mean a lot more teams are kind of in it until the end. And, when more teams are in it to the end, their fans are more engaged. And so there's revenue to the team that way. And then, of course, if there's a big wild card playoff with national television and a sold-out crowd, that's a big revenue booster. So I think what will happen is once you get used to this, that they're going to roll with it, because let's face it, if you feel like your team has a chance to win, you're going to be much more engaged. Maybe that means some fans that otherwise were trying. I mean, think about the American League East, for example. Like 99% of the time, though it's not always the case, it's the Yankees and Red Sox. One's a division winner, one's a wild card. That's the end of it. Now they have 2 wild cards, and if they have 4, then a team that's always been very, very good with their meager resources, like the Tampa Bay Rays, well, then they feel like they're always in it. And the Toronto Blue Jays, with lots of young talent right now, they'll be in it. So I think that was what was in mind when they started the idea of expanding the playoffs, and I think it's just going to stick now.
The players mentioned broadcast enhancements, adding value like live mics on players. Well, wouldn't we say that also in a broadcast enhancement would be more playoff games, which could potentially be when baseball has to renegotiate their next set of contracts to get more money for baseball and the players, because they're going to have these more games?
Yeah, this will be really interesting, because even if they come to a short-term solution, what's going to happen as people become free agents? It's one thing to say, well, all right, we're going to try to maximize as players the dollars that we get this year. And by the way, based on this last proposal, they seem they're just sticking with the prorated number and not any discounts beyond that. there's going to be some effects down the road because some players are going to be free agents, and then teams will simply just not have the cash, especially right away. Now, you would think that on the long term, the economics will work themselves back out, but it's a real consideration that someone like JT Realmuto will have fewer suitors in next off season. Now, the big guys might be involved. If you've got a smaller team like the Pittsburgh Pirates who might otherwise say, okay, well, we have money for one really good player, well, they're probably out. Kansas City Royals probably out. Maybe even a team like the Milwaukee Brewers that signs a player once in a while, they'll be out. Although they don't need a catcher. But my point is there's going to be a smaller pool of money from which to go forward with. So it seems like it's going to catch up to them for a little while, and you're going to have to kind of ride it out. So any little thing that they can do to add revenue now kind of puts more money into the free agent pool later. So there really is a great incentive for them to do that now, whatever it takes. And if it is doing some sort of, kind of acting as broadcasters in game or something of the sort, that they're willing to do that to keep that revenue coming.
Speaking of doing whatever it takes, that kind of leads us to the other thing I want to talk to you about today, Frank, which was the Roy Halladay E60. And, we always use a phrase like, do whatever it takes when it comes to sports, right? It's a common refrain that we've all used at one point or another. But what I find interesting is the fact that it seems like a lot that was going on with Roy that was talked about in the E60 was just stuff that people were not aware of. And, how surprised were you by some of the stuff that they talked about in the documentary, and how much of it was, maybe now with hindsight being 2020, it was maybe less surprising because of what we know about the world we live in now?
Me personally, I'm not that surprised. My family, I'm sure a lot of people listening, their family, they probably all had somebody who had real injuries, and it led to prescription painkillers, and then that kind of gets out of hand. I mean, I think that's a real experience that real people have. And, you always think of the superstars like Roy Halladay as sort of being, invincible in some way, and they can overcome anything, but really that's a real problem people in my family have had, people in lots of other people's families have had, and I think that this really shows that he really indeed was a human being. And my take on Roy Halladay all along was, when he was on that mound, he was just a total grizzly bear, and I remember sitting in the Diamond Club once watching him pitch, where I had a really good view, and just looking at his face, I was terrified from the stand. Because he was such a competitor and seemed like he was the strongest man in the entire world, and nobody could catch up to him. But when he retired, he was like a big teddy bear. He was like the down-to-earth guy that was active in the community in the Clearwater area where he had his home, and we saw a lot of him being a regular guy. And part of being a regular guy is to have the same kind of struggles that a lot of people have in their families. So, and I will say too, I was really proud of Braden Halladay to speak like that, for his wife to be forthcoming, because that can provide a lot of hope for people who have those same problems in their families. So, so that was a big takeaway for me from that. From the documentary is that he was like everybody else, and maybe that'll inspire somebody to seek some help that they think is not out there.
What could it also maybe tell us, Frank, about when how many times have we all done it? No matter who we are, whether we're people like you and I who cover sports, or just as fans, we say, what is wrong with this guy? Why can't he make that pitch or make that hit or make that jump shot? That sometimes there are mitigating factors that are involved in everybody's life that may impact their performance on the court or on the field in ways that go beyond just the normal stuff, that maybe some of these athletes are going through things that we have no idea about.
And that's one of the major reasons I haven't put a total emphasis on sabermetrics, because you can't really quantify when somebody is going through a divorce. You can't quantify when somebody is dealing with that type of pain or self-medicating in that way. So there's such a human element to the game, and Roy Halladay's life really shows that at the end of the day, you could have the most talent in the world, but humanity is humanity, and it's going to catch up to you in one way or another. And it really does affect the performance. And we even saw, too, the one thing that I never, ever would have guessed watching Roy Halladay pitch is that he would have his own lack of confidence at times in his life, that he seemed like the guy that was just ready to go out and dominate. And, he was worried about disappointing people and those real emotions that people have. And this was a very stark reminder that, yes, even the best of athletes, the ones that throw, and actually, as Brandy even said it in the documentary, imperfect people have their perfect moments, and recognizing that, people are imperfect in some way.
He is Frank Klose. You can follow him on Twitter at Frank Klose. Check out all of his work at 97.3 ESPN.com. He's also the co-host of the Powder Blue podcast with Hunter Birdie and Jeff Mosher. So you can catch Frank in a lot of different places. As all guests, he joined us today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Frank, appreciate your time on a Monday.
Great to talk to you, Josh.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text coming up next, 609-403-0973 here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Seattle. A busy slate coming up on the Sports Bash. We're going to keep it 2 until we'll talk more about the Phillies and about baseball. Scott Lauber, longtime Phillies beat reporter, joins Mike Gill and Hunter Birdie coming up at 3 o'clock. Football at 4. Jeff Mosher today, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Michael Kasky will main and talk more about the NBA's 22-team proposal, how that would actually work in reality. All of that coming up on the Sports Bash with Mike Gill and Hunter Birdie here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Josh Hennig back here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Got a few more minutes left with your text in just a moment, 609-403-0973. Before we get there, I did want to touch on what Frank and I just talked about with Roy Halladay. It's very easy for all of us to look at something that somebody went through, right? And come to these grandiose opinions about it. And I felt that the Roy Halladay documentary only emphasized the fact that there's so much that goes on in the world that we don't even know what people are going through. We don't know the struggles people are going through, not just in their personal life, but internally. Roy Halladay played for a Major League Baseball team. He had a wife who cared a ton about him, and he had an entire network of people around him, and none of them were aware of how deep down the rabbit hole he was when it came to his addiction, his insecurity, into his fear of admitting that he had a problem. And it was very powerful when Brandy Halladay said, listen, we help one person go get help. This meant something. And I think that that's one of the things that stands out to me, that a lot of times when we're critical of athletes, and not that we can't be critical. Look, it's our job to be critical. We're analysts. We're talking about sports. Come on. But sometimes there are other things that we don't always know about that affect an athlete from day to day. And, maybe in the middle of all of this, whether it's the pandemic we're going through or, the cries for, justice in the country that's going on in the world today, or, even the Roy Halladay E60, maybe it can just allow us to be a little bit more empathetic, not getting away from criticism and critiquing and analysis, but, maybe just to understand that these are still people as well out there who, going through the same things that anybody else would. Just a thought. All right, back to the text, 609-403-0973 with a follow-up from Rob from Bayville, by the way. I wanted to read it because I felt like this really speaks to kind of how I feel about a lot of this. Rob and I seem to be on the same page about this. He says, the NBA is planning on what to do 2-3 seasons down the road. It just feels like that Major League Baseball and its players are just screaming across the aisle at each other. And you're right, Rob from Bayville. There's something to be said for the fact that the NBA realizes they need each other. The players, the owners, the executives, the coaches, they all need to work together to make this work, because it was just barely 10 years ago they had a lockout because the NBA was in some really difficult financial situations. There were numerous teams that had all kinds of financial situations, and they had to restructure the revenue structure and the salary cap and the players' salaries and how they get paid and where that money comes from. And they had to really work out a lot of things. And over the last almost 10 years, the NBA feels like they're like, look, we need each other to succeed. We need each other to survive. We need each other to be profitable. Whereas there is a feeling that baseball, the players and the owners, they're just not united like that. There's not an understanding of we need each other. It's almost like we have to put up with each other. And as I told Frank and I told you guys earlier, I'm hoping that the players' proposal to the league is a signal that we're serious about having a baseball season. We're serious about going out there and trying to play baseball games. We're serious about trying to make this work. So we're willing to give certain concessions. We're willing to talk about certain things. We're willing to play more games. We're willing to end the season October 31st. I mean, think about it if you're a baseball player. Some of the cities that baseball plays in do not have very nice winter weather. Chicago, Detroit, Minnesota, that stadium is an outdoor stadium now. Colorado, it sometimes snows in April. Now, you know, maybe, what if the Rockies made the playoffs? They got to play a game in November. What does that mean? New York, Philadelphia, Boston. There's a lot of northern cities, Seattle, in baseball that if you go that deep into the postseason could cause some horrible logistics when it comes to weather. So if the players are willing to make that risk, because they're the ones that got to go out there and play. You know, the owners can stay safe and warm up in their luxury boxes or even stay home if they wanted to. The players are the ones that have to go out and play. So the players are willing to make even that concession that, hey, we're willing to play in the postseason in some pretty harsh conditions potentially. That says a lot. I'll never forget the 97 World Series. If I had to hear any more about Bobby Bonilla's hamstring, now the cold weather was going to tighten it up, he's having trouble keeping it loose. That's a part of sports. You get injured and your recovery may be key to your team's success or failure. And you know, if you got a player who pulled a hamstring or has an injury and they're trying to come back and it's November 20th, they're trying to play a baseball game and it's 40 degrees outside, maybe 38. That's going to be a very interesting thing for them to work through. Thanks to Frank Klose for joining us today here on 97.3